lot of discussion so far about handwriting. I told you not to get too hung up on handwriting in the first couple of weeks because I wanted you to focus more on some of the procedural things that you need to work with your kids and yourselves, okay? I'm going to ask you to now think about, as you come back in the fall session, adding this handwriting piece and incorporating it into your lessons. And I want you to think about, as we go through this, where it's going to be most appropriate, based on the kids that you're working with, to be able to add that piece in. What's going to be the most effective way for you to incorporate handwriting for that child? Because it's going to be different for everyone, okay? They're not all going to require the same amount of handwriting instruction or attention, okay? When we think about handwriting, we have to consider why we would worry about handwriting, why it's important. We need to understand that we live in a technology world. Everything is touch screen, everything is point and sweep kind of things, and even we were at Applebee's about a week ago, and you can no longer have to worry about giving the server your money to pay for your food. You can pay for it right there at the table and take off and be on your way. I really have seen over the last year an increase in the reliance on technology. I mean, we can't even call for help without going through an automated system that is very complex and very intricate with your choices and your options. I mean, you've got 5 choices and then another drop down to maybe 5 more choices, and you drop down, you spend 15 minutes going through all of the choices and never speak to a real person, okay? So handwriting is something that seems like it would be not important or not as important as it used to be. But despite all of the increases in technology, there is still a good amount of time that is spent in the classroom and in other activities doing pen and paper writing. There is still something that is useful in pen and paper writing and the ability to be able to read your own writing. Learning disabled kids that have difficulty with handwriting will suffer if we don't discuss it and we don't talk about it. Eventually, at a college level, they may be required to do some sort of handwriting activities. And if they aren't prepared for that, they're going to be failing that particular activity. One of the things that is really important and I did not see in our lessons is that read back after spelling, okay? We, at that point, are letting the kids get a really good view of what it's like to read their handwriting. So if they're not paying attention to how they're writing their letters and how they're writing their words, they aren't really caring about who's having to read them. But if we are asking them to read them themselves and putting that pressure back on them having to be able to read their own handwriting, then we get them in a situation where they're thinking more about how they're forming the letters, they're thinking more about being able to write legibly and clearly, because they've got to be able to go back and decipher that writing themselves. They're not, handing it to somebody else to read. They're handing it to themselves to read, okay? When kids are note-taking, I know that in this stage of the game we can do note-taking in a lot of different ways. However, the primary way of doing note-taking is still writing by hand, okay? The way that we have kids doing note-taking in classrooms without technology is not as effective ineffective because they're not being able to not only read their own handwriting, they're not being able to take notes that are effective. They're not being able to keep up with writing the notes as the teacher goes along. And then they're not able to study for the test, they're not able to be prepared for the next class. They get frustrated. We end up with behavior issues. We have lack of self-esteem because if they don't have what they need for the test to study, then do they do well on the test? It's unlikely, okay? So it's easier for us to change those bad habits when we have them at these younger stages than to keep letting them grow and fester. So we've talked about handwriting as far as why it's important and what stage of the game it's important in our lessons, but it's the Written Language Act that taps the processes of creating letter representations in memory and then retrieving them. So this is something that runs right up our arm, up that nerve that goes into the back of the cerebellum. And that's where all of the motor skills go. The cerebellum then talks to the brain and stores those processes. So when a child writes a letter or traces a letter, that same motor skill fires right up here into the brain and says, oh, I know that letter, I know that sound, and makes those references. Now, obviously it does it much quicker than it took for me to explain it, but the idea is that if we've got them writing and we've got them making the letters and making the symbols, they're imprinting those motor skills that go back up and make those images in the brain. Just the same as if they would be imprinting the orthographics when we're spelling and when we're looking at how a word is spelled on paper, okay? When children have difficulty with the ability to code an identified language symbol, which is letters, of course, in memory, they have many other handwriting issues and fine motor skills. The orthographic coding has a more direct relationship to handwriting than the fine motor skills do. So even though they can color and stain the lines and they can use a pair of scissors, those are all fine motor skills, but the actual act of writing the letter makes a larger imprint in the orthographic memory than just seeing that letter, okay? That's one of the key things to being able to tie our senses into all of the places in the brain. We talk a lot about doing kinesthetic activities. What's more kinesthetic than writing? I can't think of anything else that involves more kinesthetic activities than writing. When children do not remember the sequence of movement that is required in letter formation, a voluntary motor function cannot be triggered. So if they are having difficulty or haven't practiced how to write a letter or form a letter, if they're trying to write a word or a sentence and they get to that letter, they hit a block and they're not able to think in terms of what does this letter look like? How does it make? What do I have to do? Where do I have to start? And we end up with some of those crazy things where kids are starting on the bottom of the line and going up into the middle, or they're writing the cross on the T and then they're dropping the big line down because they aren't sure where they're supposed to start. We have letters that end up, instead of on a straight line, they end up kind of all zigzag because their spatial representation is off, okay? All right, so the act of handwriting is a written language act that taps the processes of creating letter representations in memory and then retrieving them. Again, manual writing provides kinesthetic reinforcement when learning to read. Did I just do this slide?
No.
There, okay. The kinesthetic memory is the earliest, strongest, and most reliable form of memory and may aid in remembering orthographic patterns. And we talked about that working memory and how there is only a very limited amount of working memory available. So If we can change the memory so that we move from working memory into long-term kinesthetic memory, then we're not relying on that very small space to keep everything in. We're then retrieving from a permanent file that tells us how to make the letter and then helps us associate the sound with the letter. Some people that have better kinesthetic memory than visual memory can learn to write easier than they can learn to read. Writing training can be their strongest pathway to learning. These are kids that are going to be able to rewrite words or rewrite vocabulary or rewrite notes and be able to remember them because they've written them instead of read them. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. We have lots of advantages to having good handwriting. It's a time saver for both the teacher and the student because the teacher spends less time having to decipher assignments, and those assignments get done in less time when we have good handwriting skills. Our spelling improves because as writing becomes more legible, the errors that were there start to weed themselves out, because many of those errors are because we can't read what we wrote, and we don't know that we wrote the letter A already. And obviously note-taking is going to improve. The better that we are at writing, the better that we're going to be at taking notes a little faster and being able to grasp and understand what we have written down. So if we look at some of the history with handwriting, we have had many different things that have been used to write with. Most of you are using a pen or a pencil today. We look at history, we had things like quill pens that were usually made from goose feathers. Some people used swans, turkeys, pheasants, peacocks, crows even. Seems to me that it was kind of whatever they could find available. And they used something called iron gall or carbon-based ink. So they dipped the quill into the ink and then used it to write. What we know as paper today and what you're writing on today is definitely different than what paper was several thousand years ago. We use things like parchment paper, animal skins, papyrus, or something called rag paper. Has anybody ever heard of rag paper? Mm-hmm. It's actually textile fibers that have been, well, they process them now, but they were like decayed old remnants of rags and old clothes, and they mixed that all together and made it into a piece of paper that they could write on. Papyrus was a plant, and obviously we know where animal skins come from. Most of the writing that was done in history was done in monasteries by monks or scribes. So there wasn't very many people that really knew how to write. They had to pay people to write letters for them. They had to, in a lot of cases, pay people to read those same letters to them as well. What kind of things do you think that the monks would have been writing in a monastery? Think about monks.
Were they like transcribing or translating different religious documents?
I would definitely say that was one thing. But think in terms of, I mean, for the most part, do monks communicate with each other?
No. I mean by writing.
There's certainly no verbal communication, right? So they had to be communicating another way. And writing is definitely another way that they would have been communicating. I would think that they probably did a lot of, and I know this isn't a word that would have been used at the time, but maybe contract work, where they had to transcribe things for wealthy nobles or kings and queens. And they were the people that were able to do those kind of things because of their experience with writing.
Didn't they like the Bible?
I would think they were
do that?
definitely doing translations of the Bible.
Yeah.
And we have, I mean, you can go into just about any Christian store and see several different versions of the Bible.
But that would have been the Old Testament.
Mhm. Yeah. So paper was something that was expensive, and that was one of the reasons that we ended up with all of those different things. People used what they had. They wrote on wood, they wrote on whatever was available. And it was really a big deal to have a letter or something that was written on a piece of paper, or even a book for that matter, was a huge, huge deal. When we look at things that were transcribed, like the religious documents in the Bible and things like that, we have to consider the fact that these were very large documents, very large manuscript type things. So when they were transcribing, it wasn't always one person that did the whole piece. They would take turns, they would switch off. So there was maybe several people working on a document at the same time. So when they decided how they were going to make their letters, it was kind of a personal choice. And if you think in terms of cursive writing, there is the right way to make a cursive letter. But then there's everyone's individual, personal handwriting style, right? Everybody has their own style. Everybody writes their own way. It's cursive to an extent, but it's your personal style, okay? So if we think in terms of how people were transcribing documents, they're also going to have their own personal styles of how they were writing. At this stage, we've got something that was not very many people being able to do, okay? We have something that was, and I don't know if this is the right word choice, but I think it was something that was revered. This was something that there was this select group of people that were able to do, and they took it to an extent where it was very personal to them. I mean, they worked hard at their craft. They worked hard at making it pretty, beautiful, elegant. So each person had their own signature way of making their letters. Up until the 12th century, we didn't even have a dot above the I. So it was really hard to determine if that was an I. We have on our card pack an issue with the small L. Everybody thinks that's I. First time through the pack, that's the exact response that every kid gives you because it looks like an I. Okay. The long and the short S. We don't have anything called a long and a short S now, do we? We have one S. U and V were written exactly the same. The difference is obvious now. I mean, we've widened our U out a little bit. But if you look at that document down below, you can see everywhere that they've got a U or a V, it's exactly the same. There's no difference. So fast forward a couple of thousand years, how do you know if that's a U or a V? There's nobody there to tell you. There's nobody there to read it to you. So you're guessing. One of the letters, if you look and see where the S is, you see that how it looks kind of like an F? It doesn't even look like what we know is an S. Okay? This is a segment from the 10th century Old English colophon to the Lindseyfarne Gospels. So this is something that would definitely have been a religious document and very prominent piece of literature that would have carried its way through history. The example comes from the monastery of San Domingo in Silos, Spain, and I was really amazed at some of the way that the letters were written, and you can see the S in some cases kind of looks like an R. In the first one, if you look up at the first one, it kind of looks like it's an R. So we have to think about what's required. What does our kids need to be able to do to be able to get ready to have good handwriting? Okay. They're going to look at you like you're silly and out of your mind when you ask these things, but it really does matter. You need to have good posture when you are writing. Your writing hand needs to rest on the page. You need to sit up straight in your chair, feet flat on the floor, so that you are sitting with your trunk straight, okay, in your seat, so that when you're writing, you're not all curled up in a ball, you're relaxed and comfortable. The paper placement matters because it's different for right-handed and left-handed kids, and it didn't used to be that way. When I was I'll never forget being in 4th grade and Mrs. Nahas teaching cursive writing, and we had these four kids that were left-handers. They were writing upside down on their page because they had to keep their paper turned to the right, which is obviously not the correct way to do it, but at the time that's how they were teaching. So I always see, especially with our kids, that they never want to hold on to their paper when they're writing. And I don't honestly, I just don't know what that's about, because the paper moves and they just don't seem to care. But I always have to remind our kids to make sure that, let's get out their hand up there and help hold that paper so it's steady. And they need to be able to have all of their things that they might have to reference right there. So maybe when we're writing, we need to have a dictionary out. We need to have a thesaurus out right on our table so that we're ready and we can be prepared if we have to look something up, okay? While the child is writing, he or she is receiving feedback in the form of pressure and the pull of the pencil against the paper. Pencils with soft lead require less pressure, reducing fatigue. Pencils without erasers are also preferred. It reduces the time spent erasing and allows errors to be seen for future planning. Instruct the children to bracket their mistakes or draw one line through. So when we're looking at doing corrections, especially in our dictation page, because that's really where we should be only doing corrections. We shouldn't have to make corrections in our spelling words, because the theory is that we've got it spelled correctly before it hits the paper. But in dictation, there is an opportunity for error that they need to be able to make corrections through. Our kids tend to do what when they want to correct something?
Write it, write it.
They write over it. What else?
Erase it.
They go old scribble and erase it. Yeah. The erasing, it doesn't bother me so much as that big, huge black mark that they make over the wrong word. I always am trying to remind the kids, one line through will do, and let's keep on going, because they'll spend 5-10 minutes sitting there coloring that word so that nobody can see that they made a mistake. That's back to that thing about making sure that they're comfortable with the idea that everyone makes mistakes, and making mistakes is okay. We want to make sure that we understand what we're teaching. What is the point of teaching handwriting? We want them to be able to understand that we go from the top to the bottom when we write a letter. We go from left to right when we write a word. We want them to understand those natural stopping breaks between words so that we have spacing that doesn't make all of our words run together and look like one big, huge, long word. And we want to look at the correct letter formation. We want to make sure that when we're writing an E, it looks like an E. And when we're writing a U or a V, we can tell the difference. I had a child yesterday that was spelling something, and all of her N's looked like H's. And I finally said, "Can you spell that out loud for me?" And of course she spelled it, with the N, and I said, "I think you're going to have to make that N look like an N, because right now it kind of looks like an H." She went, "Oh, okay, I'll fix it." We have to talk about grip. And when we look at the idea of pencil grip, we're going to see kids that have come in with all kinds of different issues with pencil grip. You can, in some cases, fix the grip, and in some cases, it's just a lost cause. It depends on the age of your kid. But if you have your pencil laying down in front of you, and you take these two fingers, and you lay them down against the table on either side of the pencil, and you pick up, then you've got, right, almost automatically, this finger kind of comes in behind, and you've got your tripod grip, okay? The other thing that you can do is use the pencil grip things. And I've given you some of these in your bags. There are also, get it out of here, these little ergonomic figures, and they kind of fit into all the grooves where your fingers are, and help you remember how to hold your pencil. And it makes it easier. The only issue that I have with the pencil grips is sometimes the kids don't feel the pencil the same way, and they're gripping or pushing so hard together to hold onto the pencil because they're not feeling it, that they're causing themselves cramps and pain because they're pushing so hard. So we have two types of handwriting. Manuscript writing or block writing is standard in all books, magazines, etc. Cursive writing was something that seems to be falling by the wayside in the United States right now. In the 18th and 19th centuries, this was the standard of all written communication was in cursive writing. There was a large amount of handwritten letters, professional correspondence. The Declaration of Independence was written in cursive writing. By the 1970s, the emphasis on learning cursive writing started to drop off, and I'm not even sure that every school teaches handwriting, especially cursive writing, at this stage of the game. Why is cursive something that would make a difference with our kids?
It's fluid. You don't stop and start all the time. It's just one fluid motion.
Right. And which way does it go?
Goes from left to right.
So it reinforces that left to right directionality for our kids.
I think that date seems by the 1970s. I learned cursive.
I learned cursive.
I wonder where that date seems so
That would have been,
early.
I would have been in elementary.
Because you didn't have computers at that point.
No, but cursive writing started to take a dive by the time my brother got into school. And he would have been late 70s. I was early 70s in elementary by the time he got there.
I know, we still teach it at our school.
That's good.
But the problem is, it's the curriculum. There's so much that you have to teach. There's so little time.
I actually had a teacher from a private school that had a meltdown because we taught one of her students how to write a cursive letter, and she hadn't taught him yet. She wrote this scathing letter to his tutor, and she was like all offended and upset, and I'm like, calm calm down, you know, it's okay, you know, but she's mad. And I was like, well, you know, I don't know what to tell her that we needed that letter. And she was really upset.
Did you ever do it?
No. I mean, they were taught it in 3rd grade and then never used it again. My daughter's going into 10th and my son's going into 8th, and they don't use it, and nor can they read it. My mom writes in cursive, and they are always saying, could you read this card to me, because they can't read her.
See, Jeffrey never got cursive. He just never got it. He hit 3rd grade, and the teacher wrote on the board all the homework assignments. The first week of school, it was, Jeff's not doing his homework, and he says, Mom, I don't know what she's writing up there. It's all in cursive. And I went, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to her that, you know, some of the kids didn't read cursive, but he'd gotten through 1st and 2nd grade and he never did it.
So now my daughter's 21. She writes in cursive. She can read cursive. You know, remember when you were a little girl? It was like how you could just make your name so cute in cursive. Do you remember doing that?
Must have been
A little hard, but you're on.
I know exactly.
Oh, a lot of kids, their parents start teaching it before we do, because we don't do it till halfway through 2nd grade.
Right.
So a lot of my kids, like the little girls, the parents teach them how to write cursive before.
Anna's 25,
I think it's gone.
and she hates to write cursive.
Yeah, my 2 boys, they
She
don't
avoids
know.
it. Now, she's very tedious with printing, but she hates cursive. Cursive is not something that she will use.
Sound checks, but even still, the signatures. The only thing that, you know, there was a concern about the signature. They have to know how to sign a check, but we don't even use checks anymore. And if you had to use a check, your signature could just be a squiggle, and that's acceptable as long as it's consistent.
Yeah, my kids, that's what they're always like, when they have to sign something for like school or something, like, Mom, I don't know how to sign in you. They're like 16 and 13, but my 13-year-old never had cursive, they didn't teach it then. My 16, I think he had it in elementary school, but not really, you know, just kind of showed him it, and that was it.
I love cursive handwriting.
My kids hate it.
Is this sad news?
I know
That's not the world.
This is going on.
Well, let's think about,
I
if
just
we're
love
looking at
cursive.
history, who used it? Who was the main people that were writing? Who were the educated people? The monks were? Who else?
Aristocrats.
Aristocrats. So we had a very select group of people, okay? These were people that took pride in being able to know how to do something that other people couldn't, right? For the most part, women didn't even know how to write or read at that point in the game,
See,
okay?
and I think my cursive handwriting looks better than manuscript. Because I don't always like to print.
See, my writing's kind of a combo.
That's what I do.
Mine's kind of a
Mine's
combo
mixed.
between the two, yeah. A little bit of a hybrid.
It's hard to teach it when you don't do it right yourself. Every time we have to review.
Yep.
And slow down. I can do it very well if I just take my time to do it
It's
forever.
like I do one thumb on my ends and you make 2 when you're teaching it.
If you look at some of the different kinds of handwriting, now I've got, these are obviously computer printed handwriting things. And we've got a Times New Roman, I think one of those is that Comic Sans. But on any computer now, you can pull up just thousands of different graphic handwriting. I think one of these was supposed to be in cursive, but didn't transfer over into the new version of PowerPoint, it looks like, because I think that bottom one was one that was supposed to be in cursive. I didn't catch that when I updated. So when we look at teaching handwriting in the lesson plan, the most appropriate places to work on handwriting would either be just before we do what says or during what says. When we teach a new letter, we need to talk about handwriting and how we make that letter. And that should be kind of a standard. You know, when we start to make the letter A, we start in the middle and we come around, up, and down, and it's all one motion. You know? I watched a child write a letter the other day, and she put her stick over here, and then she was over here doing something, then she went back over and put this little curve on the bottom, and I was like, holy cow, you know. I said, one motion, man, vroom. And she just didn't get that, but there is no follow through or flow if we're picking the pencil point up all those times off the paper. A good time for writing is maybe doing warm-ups. When you're first talking to your kids and talking about the day and how it's going, you might want to do some activities to get ready for writing. Maybe you do some stretching, some shoulder rolls. I noticed in some of the observations that I did, we had a kid that got up and kind of did one of these things and shook himself out and did some stretches. And those are all things that our kids might need to do at the end of the day. They're all coming after school when they've already sat all day, and you're asking them to sit for another hour. Okay? So when we teach a new letter, one of the things that we want to think about is the best way to teach a new letter that's multisensory. First of all, we're going to go through our auditory, where we're going to ask, what sound do you hear, and where do you hear it, so that we can pinpoint where that phoneme is. But when we get to showing them the letter, we want to maybe exaggerate what the size is, so that it is easier for tracing, so that it's easier to feel those gross motor skills when we come around with the circle of the V. Our arm goes out wide, we're reaching up really high to bring our straight line down. We want to make sure the child names the letter. We've got tracing involved here. With dry erase markers, we can do it with an eraser as well. You can go around and say, fee. This will help me erase it. The Handwriting Without Tears uses a chalkboard that uses a sponge, a wet sponge, to do the erase, and you can see the outline of the wet letter. Skywriting is a great activity, like I did with the B. We can say B says B, okay? Dot to dot is something that is not recommended because the kids tend to find the activity more of a seek and find, where we're looking for the next dot, as opposed to actually doing the flow of the letter, okay? We might go to the extent where we give the kids the large letter on paper. This is where that kinesthetic page comes in to play, where we've got our phoneme on the paper. It's very large. Child traces, names the letter with their finger first. You can use the plastic canvas. You can use chalk screens or gel pads over the letter. I always then have the child trace and name the letter with 3 different writing utensils. The point of having the 3 different writing utensils is because each one feels different in your fingers. I allow them to use fat markers, skinny pencils, so that there's a difference and we get the different sensory input, okay? I always then have the child model or copy the letter so that they have first ones they're tracing, and then ones that they're writing on their own. So we want to take them down to an appropriate size letter after we've done the large oversized. We want to use age-appropriate lined paper so that we have some guidelines. You may want to use the handwriting paper that is gauged for the grade level that your child is in. You want to make sure that they have plenty of room to write. And we want them to write that letter repeatedly several times. And the objective is not so that we can get as many letters as possible. It's letters that are written correctly possible, okay? So if we want to write 10 B's, we want those 10 Bs to look like Bs the whole way across. This isn't a hurry-up process. The child then uses that letter when they write words. So we're going to reinforce that letter where?
In what sense, in spelling?
Spelling. Yep, we're going to take it right into spelling so that they can have lots of practice being able to remember that letter in sequence with other letters that make up the spelling of the word. If we've got a letter that they're having trouble with and we need to review it, bring that skywriting back into play. Get them to stand up, make that letter really big. Get them to write it really big on paper, and then get them to write it correctly 3 times. Please remember to pay attention to what hand your kids write with, and that their paper is in the right position for whether they're left or righties. When you're doing writing activities that are specific to a particular phoneme, you want to spend some adequate amount of time being able to teach how to make that phoneme. You want to encourage them to practice that at home. And it's a good idea to teach the types of letters within groups if we're actually having to teach how to write letters. We want to do the short letters, then we want to do the ascenders, then we want to do the descenders, so that they are doing the same movements for each group of letters. It makes it easier for retention. We want to remember to use our OG principles when we're teaching so that we involve all of those senses. The auditory connects to the visual, connects to the kinesthetic. We want to give them fair practice. So we're only going to make them practice things that they have been explicitly taught and learned. We want to continue meaningful review, strive for automaticity. And another suggestion is that we don't require spelling or dictation to be in cursive unless all of the letters that are necessary have been taught. So we have to be really careful about how we use cursive in other parts of the lesson. If we haven't taught them how to make cursive F, the word fish is going to be a problem. And we want to correct one mistake at a time. So let's talk about why we teach cursive. What kind of things did we talk about?
It's fluid.
Uh-huh.
I don't pick the pencil up all the time.
Mm-hmm. What else?
Starts from bottom to the top, starting on the line going up rather than starting at the top.
Uh-huh. I can't hear you.
Because left to right, like you.
Left to right directionality, yeah. Anything else?
Well, you need to know how to write your name in cursive.
Definitely do, yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
You need to be able to write your signature, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other ideas?
I'm serious, it's true.
Well, if you get
But
better
think
at
of
handwriting, you're
contracts
not
and stuff like
concentrating.
that.
It's like better at reading, you're not concentrating so much on making your letters, you are spelling the entire word.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not
That's
stuck.
what it's
And I'll give you an example of that need to know how to write your name thing, because my kids got savings bonds from their grandparents that they had saved up and saved up. And they wanted, I don't know, it was when one of the PlayStations came out, it was the latest range. And we had these bonds, and I said, well, I said, some of these have matured. If you guys want to get a PlayStation, you could use a couple of them. And they both thought that was a good plan, you know, that's what they were going to do. And we went to the bank, and the person at the bank says, okay, well, you're going to need to sign the back. And the two of them looked at me with this blank look and said, well, I don't know what that means. What do you mean I got to sign the back? And, well, your signature. It was hysterical because my son was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know to do that, Mom. You know, that I had to write it on a piece of paper and show him what I meant before he could then sign these bonds off. You have to use your signature on your driver's license. You must sign your driver's license. You have to use your signature
Taxes.
for
Oh, maybe
taxes.
not.
But I don't have to sign it when I file electronically. But you have to have your signature when you file for unemployment and when you file for welfare benefits. Your signature has to be, in addition to an electronic signature, your
That doesn't
signature
mean
has
it
to
needs to
be
be legible.
legible. Legible
I can just say,
is
my daughter
different.
she just went and got a ID for her to go away on that trip. It was not a driver's license, just a documented Pennsylvania.
No, you're right.
Photo ID,
But it's
and
her signature.
what she wrote was illegible to every single person and yet met the benefits of what it needed to be. I'm not sure what will happen as she becomes an adult. And we've talked about it, but it's not a fight I'm worth,
Yeah.
Well,
you
it's
know,
just
I'm
like when you
having, I
sign
just
the
feel like,
credit card things. Even if
Yeah.
you're trying to write neat, they don't come out
Right,
You know,
right. I
like,
just
they
think
don't
that
even
it's-
be legible. I don't even know why they bother.
Yeah, my sister's a doctor and she doesn't want anyone like seeing her name. So she'll write K for the first name and K for the last name and literally just scribble it.
Mhm.
Like everything.
Well, she has a reason.
She's
though.
like, I don't want people like reading my name.
Great. Well, not only that, she
I'm like, okay. you
it's
can't read at
easier
all.
for things not, like prescriptions not to be
Yeah.
forged,
She's
you know.
okay. She's like, yeah, I'm scribbling it.
But there are specific places where a signature is something that you need to have. So, if we think about the reasons why we need signatures, or why we need cursive, one of the biggest things for our kids is that each letter is distinct. So when we have kids that are mixing up things like B and D, B and D are definitely different in cursive writing. And you can definitely tell the difference between a B and a D when you're looking at them cursive. It will eliminate or certainly reduce the number of those reversals and transpositions. There are some things that require cursive writing. And the theory is that if you have better handwriting, you have better grades. All of those things that you guys mentioned fall under the advantages to understanding and using cursive writing. We have elimination of the problems with separations between words and letters. We have that left to right directionality. We have all of the letters starting on the same line, spacing between the words. What we're looking at from a tutoring standpoint of when we can teach cursive, there are a lot of different opinions about when is a good and appropriate time to teach cursive. I talked to you about the child whose teacher had a fit because we taught a letter that he hadn't learned in school yet. So we tried to make sure that cursive's already been introduced in school before we approach the teaching or the reinforcing at the center. We look at the handwriting, and if there's remediation that's needed, then we go through the process of teaching correctly. Definitely talk about cursive with teenagers, because they all should have some exposure to cursive writing. And when the handwriting is illegible, cursive is a really good thing to teach them. Now, all of that being said, my most important or biggest concern is that they can read cursive writing. Okay? So I look at the idea of cursive writing as something that I should present them with as a visual that they are able to then read to me. So I would probably do some of my sentences in cursive. I would probably do even a short paragraph or short story that I've transposed into cursive. I think that if they can read cursive, it's more important to be able to read it if they would come across it in a situation than having to write it. So if we have to choose or we have to consider the idea of cursive, we want them to read it. We want them to be exposed to it, we want them to understand what a cursive A looks like, what a cursive B looks like. We want them to realize that some of the letters look a little different when they're in cursive than when they're in print, and be able to recognize those differences and read it. Case in point is my child who couldn't read his homework assignments because the teacher wrote in cursive. So, if you are thinking about incorporating cursive, I suggest that you incorporate it into areas like maybe a spelling word or two. I would give maybe some of your sentences written in cursive that they have to read. I really do not force any of my kids to always write in cursive. That's not a requirement that I make. I encourage it, I suggest it, but I am kind of under the belief that handwriting is great and important, but being able to read is the notch above handwriting as far as what is on the scale of importance. So I worry about whether they can read it as opposed to whether they can write it. Okay? Any questions?
I do have a question.
Okay.
So when we're introducing, or when both of my two children cannot write a lowercase a to save their life in a way that looks legible. It's always.
Are we talking print or are we talking cursive?
Print.
Okay.
Neither of them have done any cursive, and I'm not sure how eager I am to begin that, but
Right.
I can say off the bat, I'd like to start next week with the letter A at the beginning of the alphabet. Is it important to do, because they're older children, 2nd grade and 6th grade, is it
Okay.
important to do capital A, lowercase a, and cursive A? Do you just focus on what the main problem is right now, that is the lowercase a?
Well, let's think about how many times they're going to see lowercase a as opposed to uppercase a.
Right, and
Okay.
you're writing it an awful lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So that would be where I would target. I would focus on that lowercase a, because the lowercase a is going to certainly come up a whole lot more times than the uppercase a. Okay.
And then both being in Montessori, like they don't introduce uppercase A for like a while.
Oh, really?
I mean, they have because they're older, but like when I teach the younger ones, and we don't even introduce uppercase A. to
Oh,
them.
okay.
So like they.
That's
don't
probably why
learn it
Skylar could
yeah,
not do
they
that
don't.
on.
So she
her
she might have
first
just learned it like going to the 2nd grade, like because I have kindergarten and we don't introduce uppercase A to them at all.
Okay.
We always
That's
do
interesting.
it. Yeah, because that's Montessori, so obviously.
Yeah, but that's like completely opposite
Yeah, they don't.
not that it's right or wrong. I just find that interesting that because I know in preschool my niece is doing the uppercase letters, and I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, wow. But how many times do you see and have to recognize capital letters as opposed to the lowercase letters? And I always wondered why. That's the first thing that they teach is all of these capital letters, but
I think because straight lines are much easier for a child to draw than curves.
well, that makes sense, but realistically, that's not how, I mean, when they're looking in books, that's not, the majority of the letters are not going to be capitals.
When I taught at Head Start, I think we had to teach them how to write their name correctly, like just the first letters capitalized. They didn't want them learning it all in caps. And usually, I think a lot of times just parents at home teach your kids all capital letters before they even go to preschool. Because a lot of kids seem to know how to write their name in all caps. The first when it comes from home.
Interesting.
They need to learn a lot of this.
It's about 11:15, and I think maybe we could take a minute and